looks a little bit more promising. That was a bit nerve-wracking, that, wasn't it? I'm guessing some adverts are going to be playing for a lot of you. Anyway, so I'll just wait for a moment or so before starting. But apologies for being late. That's very uncharacteristically like me. I started the stream, and it said your stream key is invalid. And of course, I did change it after the Twitch break-in 3 weeks ago, but it looks like they've changed it again and haven't notified me. Good, we've got some people here already. So we've got Alter Ego, hello. Magetsub, hello. Channel Mouse, hello. Annie Cater, hello. Danderstein, hello. Excellent, good. Well, we've got some people here. And tonight is going to be a bit of a getting back into it episode. Now, I know we've had one of those not so long ago, but I do feel that I probably should sort of explain what's been going on a little bit. And it's just that October happens to be the busiest time for me at work. In fact, if you go back over to my YouTube channel, you can see typically in October I only ever put one video out, and it's usually an apology that says, well, actually I'm really busy at the moment. And there's some truth to that. It typically is when our all of our year financials start coming together and the big projects for the big robot owners sort of get allocated. So it's a busy time for me at work. But that has also been coupled with, as you all well know by now, and are tired of me saying so, becoming a father has been a bit hard work. But something interesting started to happen about 2 weeks ago. X10 slept through the night. And this has been absolutely life-changing already. It means there's actually some free time. So X10's bedtime is about 8 o'clock actually. So they've just gone to sleep now. And that's really nice because that means I've got then about 8 till about 11 o'clock, 3 hours of an evening to sort of do, well, all of my chores, but then also get in a bit of code. So over the last couple of weeks, I've been getting in more code than I have done for quite some time. So things are slowly getting back to normal. I'm sure there'll be some sort of growth spurt that'll put a stop to all of that. Anyway... good, we've still got some viewers, that's encouraging. What I thought I'd like to do tonight, though, is look at Space Thing through a wide-angle lens a bit and start to think, where is this project actually going? And I've also not got my glasses at the moment. Good evening, Alex, nice to see you. The idea being... Hang on, my phone just went ping, I have to check these things now. That's okay. You're getting ads. I think everybody's going to be getting ads now. I'm sure Twitch have some rather large legal bills to pay. And some talent bills to pay, I imagine, too, after the fiasco that happened. So, yes, what I want to try and do is sort of put Space Thing into some context that I can actually try and finish this project. I'm not getting anxious to sort of move on to something else, but we've sort of been drifting from idea to idea and concept to concept, and part of the problem is I don't know where I'm going with it. It's about that time that we need to start actually thinking, what is the game going to actually be? And we've been using these CodeZone sessions to sort of explore all sorts of interesting gaming bits and pieces. Excuse me a second. You pre-watched the ads this time. Because we've looked at entity component systems, we've had state machines, we've looked at timing, we've looked at motion, we've looked at rendering, we've looked at selections, we've looked at sort of resource management and assets. I'm desperate to sneeze here, I can feel it building up. It's going to happen. Yes, I've got a little bit of a cold. I don't think it's COVID, but certainly a bit sniffly today. And as you can see, I've got a graphic up on the screen, and we actually did quite a lot of stuff so far in Space Thing. We've got the ability to create a universe. It's somewhat procedurally generated at the moment. We can navigate it, we can zoom in and around it, and we can put objects into this universe, and we can place satellites, and everything orbits everything else. And we can place these satellites, and we can construct the satellites out of modules. In fact, this is one of the satellite modules here. They line up with these grids, and we can sort of piece them together bit by bit. And so we've got all of these sort of tools and these fragments of game, but what I haven't actually got is a game idea. So I thought tonight that's what we'll spend some time fleshing out. So you guys can help me sort of decide what I want to do with this project. Because I'm conscious that it could just keep going on and on and on, and we'll never actually see anything finished. And I've got some material to start making into YouTube videos, which is something I want to be getting on with. So I'm not saying CodeZone's coming to a close, but I certainly sort of want to move it along a little bit faster than it has been. Because I've been away for the last 2 weeks through being busy, and before then sort of the momentum behind Space Thing was dying. But I've kind of, I've got a second wind almost. Let's get ready to learn. Well, maybe not so much learning tonight. We're going to be doing a bit of game designing tonight. What do I want you to do with this project? Code it. Exactly. Alex, you're absolutely spot on. That's what we want to do. And Annicator is talking to himself. That's encouraging. So, I'm not going to repeat all of that just immediately, but we'll go. I'll say it again for those that have realised the stream is on and have joined a bit late. But tonight is really going to be about what we're doing with Space Thing. So I've thought what we'll do is dazzle my entire audience with a big white screen and start sort of penning down the things that we want to do. What have we got? Gruffler. Gruffler, hello. Yes, I've not got my glasses on today either, so coding is actually a bit trickier. Oh my, a design document. Yes. And I thought we could try and scribble some design stuff down, create some notes and see how well this all works. Design document, yes, this is true. And we blinded Alex. Where's the Visio diagram? I'd love to have a copy of Visio. I use Visio all the time at work. I think it's one of the best tools that exists in software. It's a great way to design anything. But there just isn't anything comparable that's cost effective. The Joker, hello. Saucy63, hello. Danny Cron's here as well, hello. Used to have a student license, yeah, it's a shame. You should try Obsidian for documentation. It's more. I mean, Visio is it's a vector art tool, but it's very much geared towards sort of boxes and arrows, but it does that very, very well. So you can quickly just throw ideas down. I use it for everything at work. I use it just as a big sort of scrapbook type thing. Yeah, I don't use half of the features that it provides. So I think the plan is, what is Space Thing going to be? Right, so let's put that as a big question. What is Space Thing? And you don't often get to see my cursive writing, do you? Well, we don't know, I think is the answer. But one of the ideas that I thought I'd like to sort of play around with is we kind of wanted it to be a bit sort of SimCity-ish sort of idea, sort of building colonies, building sort of platforms, resource management. I'm going to throw that as an idea down, so we'll have some resource management too. Some resource management. Try diagrams.net. Yeah, these things are all weak. I really have. I've even installed Linux just to try some of the Linux-specific tools for diagramming. They're all appalling compared to Visio. Microsoft's guys, I'm not some Microsoft fanboy really, but the two things they've done right are Visual Studio and Visio. They're two fantastic tools. Yes, Alta. So yeah, Alta is sort of predicting what I'm going to say because he takes part in the chats on the server. So congratulations. And what we're thinking is, I want there to be some sort of conflict involved in the game, and I want the player to feel a bit of pressure to have to do something. So originally it was just going to be sort of resource management and sort of trying to find things and just keep the city balanced. The downside to this is that could take a lot of time to put together, and time is something I'm very quickly finding I don't have that much of, and I also worry about the number and requirement for sort of game assets in that regard. So I want to sort of strip things back a bit, simplify, and what I'm thinking of is we sort of create a solar system, and you have to find the resources in it and populate it, but then you have to also defend it. So I'm going to throw in a sort of a tick for defense here as well. And I quite liked the idea of having some sort of background plot. Yes, so Rossa, there's an alien invasion. I've been looking for a good diagram tool for ages now, but nobody's making any good ones. No, they're not. There isn't. I've even sort of thought, why not do it? I've got all of the tools and all of the equipment to actually try and make a really good diagramming tool. I could do it myself. I've actually got some ideas I'd like to try around that as a bit of a personal project, completely not one low code related. I would sell this project to death. So it's a completely different philosophy. But I think there are some tools that systems engineers could really benefit from using. They just don't exist. So I think that might be something I'll do if I ever find myself out of work. That's what I would take on. As long as you don't spend the next 3 months on enemy wave AI. Well, there's going to be some enemy wave AI. Yeah, that's the problem, Manny. You end up with this sort of feature creep. You create one project and then you end up creating 1,000 more. I mean, Space Thing has done that for me. Although that was kind of the point. One of the things I quite liked out of the Space Thing project so far is it's given me, I think, 6 different topics for videos to go and explore in a bit more detail. And that was kind of its point, was to sort of just have some fun, a bit more downtime, and try and think, well, when things start getting back to normal, which they are starting to, what can I do to make videos out of? I'm thinking the channel's just going to have one big reset, maybe a rebrand, and potentially a sort of slightly different take on how things are done. We'll have to see, but that's a different discussion. So when I talk about defense of this colony, I am kind of thinking like a tower wave, or whatever they're called. Space Thing as kind of Factorio in space. And it's, Twitch says, first time chat from viewer, Star579. Well, hello, first of all. And yes, well, you see, that's the kind of thing. Oh, another first time chat from To Do Lozzie. Hi, Jared. I'm finally happy to catch a stream. Well, a bit of a different, strange stream this one. I've not done one for a few weeks. Is it going to be rebrand Javid X10? It probably will be at one day, So, we're losing track here. So, what's the space thing? Well, yes, I do kind of want it to be a bit of a SimCity thing. I want to manage resources. I'm thinking a bit of a tower defense bent to it. But yes, that's the fun bit. What do we do with this sort of satellite building mechanic? So these are things that we can do: satellite building and placement. I have to remember how to spell satellite building and placement within the solar system. Now, some of the positive things that we've got is we do actually have already some quite sophisticated things. So what do we have? Well, we have a working solar system. Working solar system simulation. Simulation. It's an approximation, but it's good enough. We do actually have the ability to sort of manipulate things in space as well. Manipulate. We've got entities, because we're using this entity component system. Entities in space. But the original intention of the satellite building dynamic was that it would be far more colony based. So I kind of envisage sort of factories producing goods, taking in certain resources, processing them, and producing other sorts of goods. So I kind of thought that you'd have a satellite. So let's do a mock-up sort of satellite situation. The idea was that you would have some central core of your satellite. And you would need to power that core. So from one side of your satellite, you need sort of solar panels. That's one option for energy sources. I'll get very detailed here. So the idea was to provide some sort of power into your system. And that becomes part of your power budget. And that has some degree of influence by its proximity to the sun, of course. So if you've got things that are really far away, they're going to need to have a lot more sort of solar panels attached to them, or they need a different source of power. And building anything on the satellites consumes resources. So I can imagine that you start off by deploying a small spaceship. I don't know. little UFO type thing, and that becomes sort of it forms a base. So you get to start with, you always end up with a core and a couple of solar panels, and from there, and the other thing was a docking bay. That was it. That was what I originally thought. And the docking bay could support so many ships simultaneously landing with it. So they were the docking bay there. Let's have a quick look at some of these chats. Resources are on planets. You have to build a space station orbiting a planet to gather from it. Enemies spawn from around the edge of the map and target a random station. Okay, so let's actually capture some of these as sort of random chat ideas. I need to know, how do I scroll sideways in Visio? Not in Visio, in OneNote. So chat ideas. We'll keep down. So from the chat. So Danderstein's saying planets give us resources, which I kind of agree with. Planets and asteroids too. You see, at some point you have to start thinking, does the logistics make sense? So would you typically mine stuff on the planet and then bring up those raw materials to process in space? Probably not. Right? You'd probably process them on the planet and bring up something else. So that, to me, kind of implies that the planets are going to consist of mines, or at least sources of resources. Maybe finite, maybe infinite. Who knows? Infinite, maybe. But then we also need to perhaps on the planet have processing facilities. And I quite like this idea because it simplifies some parts of the game. I can then sort of potentially present this as just a GUI-based system. It's very simple. What mines have you got? What processing facilities? The actual physical locations of them on the planet, less relevant. Is the idea to have all of the sources invisible at all times, or would there potentially be a form of radar? That way enemies could... oh, hang on, scroll off the screen. Enemies could hide from the radars when the satellites are out of order. Maybe you do, and maybe that's something that we do need to figure. Do we have some sort of like early warning system? Oh, and thank you, by the way, Dave Churchill, for 28 viewers. Hello to those 28 viewers. You're more than welcome, but we're not doing a coding stream tonight. We're doing sort of more of a high level, what the hell are we doing stream, and moving forward with some game design decisions based from the chat as well. So we've talked about the planets and having the resources on. Do we want, some sort of far field stuff, which could be early warning systems? How do we know the enemies are appearing? So far field stuff. Early warning. Intelligence about what's coming up, perhaps you just get some simplistic, you don't know what the wave's going to involve, but you've got to gear up ready for it each time. I'm raiding you with my intro to AI university class. I give the lectures on Twitch. Well, thank you, Dave Churchill. I recognise the name, actually. I'm sure we've spoken before. Well, yes, hopefully the YouTube channel will be coming back shortly too. Everything's kind of getting back to normal a little bit, so I'm going to change the channel slightly, but I think I'm looking forward to getting it up and running again too. But thank you for that. I appreciate that. It's right, so hang on before I skip any more of these ideas, because they're going a bit quick. In the space station, in my comment, is otherwise basically the same as you've already stated. Okay. Yes, you can have multiple stations, detached cores. So yes, you're absolutely right. The idea is that you can actually have lots of things sort of floating around your solar system. So let's draw a quick solar system. We know that the central solar system is the star, or the sun of some description. And at the moment we have this facility where we can have planets, and planets can have other orbiting bodies, moons, that sort of thing. And we did actually have a rather strange scenario where I think we could have moons orbiting moons and things like that, but somebody complained and we stopped all that fun. We also have sort of an asteroid belt too, which is created. Now the asteroids may be a source of materials, because what I thought would be interesting is, and this was actually a chat idea first time around, which I'm just going to quite happily steal. I can't remember who suggested it, but I imagine it was probably either Rosso or Gruffler. We spoke in the comments on YouTube. I gave it infinite. Yes. Infinite Universe example is an assignment in the course. Oh, good. Well, good. I'm pleased. Brainstorming stream. Yeah, kind of a brainstorming stream. Invade weaker nations to gather resources to make your own planet stronger. Well, I kind of feel that what's going to happen is this. You are being chased by some invaders, or you've been kicked out of your solar system by an invading species. And you use whatever technology you have, and you basically blast a mothership to escape them, and you end up sort of immediately appearing in this procedurally generated solar system. And you have to make do with the best you can at this point. First time chat from you. I like this feature. This is nice. Gets to see people sort of joining in a bit. Buy paper clips. Okay. So the idea is you sort of find yourself with basically a survival ship landing in a solar system, and you cannot progress any further. This is where you have come out of hyperspace, warp, whatever you want to call it. This is now your new home. And before you can sort of really do very much, you've got to start building the infrastructure. Now, I quite liked the idea of planets being a secondary stage infrastructure. So the first thing you might try and do around your mothership is you can place some satellites of your own. So we can have a satellite here and a satellite here. And this is just sort of how I foresaw the game being played. And these satellites are capable of, as we've just described, they need power and they need some basic things. Now, to begin with, you get sort of a set of tools from the start. So let's say the mothership has a finite set of resources. I'm drawing this behind my camera, aren't I? Finite resources and equipment to get going. In many respects, it's like the Anno 1602 style of gameplay. You can get this basic tool. But then you've got these little craft, which you're going to have to start sending them on things to do. So the satellites have docking ports, which we've described. If a satellite has 2 docking ports, it can support 2 craft that are associated with that satellite. Maybe that can change, and then the craft could potentially go out into space and automatically harvest stuff from an asteroid and then bring it back to the satellite. And you start off just by needing to sort of pick up space dust and things in order to build up your resource library, I guess. There'll be plenty of things in the asteroids. We'll also have lots of goodies just sort of floating around in space. Let's quickly have a look. Oh, philosophical. So I've not got my glasses on. Philosophical darkness. Hello. And null alternative. Hello too. Also, make the mothership into a station. Yeah, I think the mothership probably will be a space station in its own right. So one that maybe, if you needed to, you could dismantle for resources. Because I do actually think that that's quite a useful thing to have. So this is it's basically a space station type object when you start the game anyway. I have to take off to finish up some work, just so thanks again for your awesome YouTube videos. No problem, Dave. Do come and have a chat on the Discord if you ever need to. Yes, take care of yourself. Jock in a frock. I made my wife give up her job in the helium factory. I won't be spoken to in that tone of voice. Okay. I think Jock in a frock's been on the alcoholic iron brew, I think is probably the best way to describe it. I'm trying to think of it. What's an interesting sort of Scottish beer? And I can't. Speaking of Anno, how much are you wanting to worry about the population cells? None, right? And that's the thing. It's very easy to suddenly go, right, what we can do is have huge levels of micromanagement in all of this, and it just never goes anywhere because we don't get very far. So I'm kind of having the population being self-sustaining. Population is probably going to be a resource because obviously you need to be doing all of this for some reason. And that's where we need to start thinking about sort of the solar system economy. Yeah, whiskey is interesting Scottish beer. Slater USA, hello. Cactus Bird, normal ships, hello from Sweden. Oh, I'd love to go back to Sweden. That reminds me of the 70 cans of iron brew in my living room I got for £3. That sounds like a tremendous bargain. Probably isn't iron brew. Right. So the idea is that maybe early game is you then go and sort of farm the basic resources. Now, the idea is there's not going to be sort of a wave every 5 minutes attacking you and hitting you hard. Probably gameplay time. Perhaps we want waves to occur every, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour, something like that. 45 minutes-ish, because you do actually want some time doing these sort of things. One of the design decisions do we make? Do we manually control craft? I'm kind of against that idea. I think I like the idea of craft having purpose, and they only have that one purpose, and they go away and do that automatically. So I'm going to throw that down as an idea, that craft have purpose and do it automatically and automated. So a bit like in Command & Conquer, you'd have the ore harvesters. They'd go out and just look after themselves. First time chat from viewer T Chapman 500. Hello. Well, it's certainly not a new name there. Easy for pot management to take over the game, especially if you can't pause. Yeah, I think, and that becomes a bit of fun. Do you think trading would have a place? Well, it depends who you would trade with. Now, they're the kind of things that potentially can be the sort of the balance breakers. My expectation is that we can devise a system here which fundamentally is a set of equations, and the idea is to find a state of equilibrium but with a slightly positive growth, so your solar system expands all the time, and that might be very easy to obtain. It might be very complicated. In my head, what I actually envisage is a set of sort of PID systems all interacting with each other, and effectively you're choosing the tuning parameters to make it all balanced and work. That's how I'm thinking about it. It's probably not how it's going to be implemented. But occasionally you do need a disruptor. Now, the waves themselves are going to be these disrupting forces, but maybe if you're maybe on an easier setting, perhaps you get fewer waves, you do need something else to come and disrupt, and that can be things like really tantalizing things to buy. So perhaps you get a friendly alien sort of warps in and you can actually go and trade with them or something like that. Yeah. I like the idea of setting up defensive machines and letting them perform their given function. If you've set them up well with sufficient quality, you'll survive. Yes, that's how I think it will happen. Will this happen in 2D or 3D? Does the third dimension serve anything to you? This is a purely top-down perspective. There will be no sort of 3D dynamics. There'll be no collision either. Because I just don't need to do that sort of thing. I can assume that spacecraft and planets sort of flying towards each other will find a way of avoiding each other. It's space, and there's a lot of it. So, yes, I think Alter Ego is right. I quite like the idea of just letting the machines do their own thing. Now, that can also apply to the satellites, and that's probably what we need to start thinking about. So we started up here having a look at what is a satellite. They could have other things. So let's assume our satellite also has some means of processing a resource. Well, it's going to have to need to store that resource. So perhaps does it have like a storage facility which can hold X units of input and X unit output, or just X resources? And to that storage facility, it probably needs some sort of processing plant. And the processing plant itself could have all sorts of different requirements. So firstly, it needs, at the most simple level, it takes in a resource. It probably takes in one or more. What is I can't remember what the symbol is for one or more. So I'm going to go to greater than or equal to one resource. It also is going to obviously consume power. And it just simply produces resources in its own right too. Whilst we're on that track, I kind of think power is probably a resource. So it's going to be something that's consumable, and that means basically our solar systems become some sort of processing framework that do nothing other than look at their proximity towards the sun and produce units of power. So there's starts coming together here how we can start to structure these systems interacting with each other. What is the ultimate goal? To just survive the enemy attacks? Could be annoying having carefully crafted stations being wrecked all the time. I like the creative aspect personally, making cool stations and transport links. That's just a personal preference though. Well, that was one of the ideas, wasn't it? That it would become effectively just the shipping aspect of Anno. I think there's probably some mileage in that, and we did actually start creating some tools. So where have we got in our list? Oh, hang on, scrolling the wrong thing. In our list of tools, we did actually have the ability to do route plotting, didn't we? That was something else that we already had. Let's stick that down here. Stick that in between. We had route planning. Now, I'm slowly drifting away from that being an interesting thing, because I think there's something to be said for having some natural restrictions in the game. And one of those restrictions could be that you can't actually travel stupid distances in your spaceship. You've crashed into this solar system. Perhaps it's actually you've got limited range from your base satellite or base something, doesn't matter, limited range for all of your craft. Or else the argument could be, well, why not just get all your craft together and drift on over to the next solar system? So I think there's that limitation means you've got to have outposts. So if we have craft that have very limited operational range, and perhaps in some ways they're sort of anchored to a space station, or anchored to something. They're anchored to, I don't know, some object in our system. And that might be necessary because you've kind of envisaged this is a space station here. Perhaps this is a mining system. It's got sort of a pseudo area of operation. Its craft can't leave that, and that then makes you sort of to be territorial about what you're doing. Maybe you can have rare resources that are very rare, and traders allow them to come in. I like that idea. Okay, let's have the idea of rare resources stored in the chat. I need to desperately learn the keyboard shortcut for sliding this sideways. So rare resources. Rare resources come from trading, perhaps. I quite like the idea of just having some of them floating around space, and the user simply finds them. I think that would be very rewarding. You go, yes, there's one of those things. User exploration. So sometimes the system's just doing its thing. You've got 10 minutes to kill before whatever you're going to go to university or something, and you're just sort of exploring this universe and seeing what's there. Now, the original idea, of course, is that was some user-controllable craft to go and do that in. So rather than just having free control label, rather than just having sort of a free roaming camera, you'd actually have to go and pilot a craft around the solar system. I don't know about that idea yet. It might just be more fun to have things that you can just click on and see what happens. And then we could potentially sell keys that open these special resource chests. That's usually a popular idea. Everybody likes that, isn't it? And you can have some randomness. So you don't actually know what you're going to get, even if you use up some of these keys. You've used real money to buy. That seems fair. It seems fair to me, anyway. Right, catching up a little bit. Presumably you'd be able to trade materials and resources between stations using ships that probably have to be built somewhere else. Yes, so is that these are the different types of space stations. So how do you actually create the resources that you need? Well, this particular space station, for example, could be creating ships. That could be one of its outputs. So the ship itself becomes a resource. And depending on what resources are required. And I'm going to keep it really simple, and again, ripping off Anno through and through here. So let's say you have finite numbers of resources. It takes 10 steel, 3 glass, 4 science, and a whole bunch of power and other things in order to make a ship. That sort of tabulation of data entry we can worry about in a future episode. But I think that's where the route will go down. So the ship itself is also a resource. It just happens to be a resource we can control. Danny Cron says, so the outposts will extend the operational range of the ships. Yeah, I think I quite like the idea of territory being so you can't just pick anywhere in the solar system and go, right, here we build, you've got to do it within some sort of existing territory, because craft have to get from one of your locations to the other. Now, this throws in a whole new game dynamic, and this is why I think tower defense is sort of an interesting one to play. As it stands at the moment, everything in our solar system moves. Right? So everything is orbiting everything else. So by the time the wave comes around, your defences will all be in a different position. You just don't know. I think there's some fun that could be had with that. It also means that your territories are moving around, and it also means that your shipping lanes are changing in length between one sort of port and the other. I think there's fun in that. Maybe a way to have a limit on distance is to have the ships using fuel. Like satellites create energy, ships use it to move. I like that idea. Let's capture that one too. Rosso coming out with all the good ideas here. Spends too much time on that ship. Right, so do ships have fuel? Something to have a think about. Is this going to be based on the procedurally generated planets video you made? Not quite, no. Space Thing is actually something that's already reasonably established now as how it's generated. It's a single solar system. I'm not doing the whole galaxy or anything like that. But the solar system is densely populated and sort of cartoony in scale. One of the things that we learnt early on is if you do realistic scales for solar systems, they're actually really boring. There's nothing in them. So you need to play with that scale factor a little bit. Do you think it would be better to allow new defensive units to be deployed during waves or only in between them? I think it'll be fine to try and deploy them during the waves because I don't think that the game's going to enter a special mode and go, right, you are being attacked, so you can't do anything else. It's just going to happen. That's how I'd prefer it to be. Because as soon as you start introducing sort of these two different modalities of gameplay, you need two different modalities of simulation and programming and everything else. So, not so sure. In fact, do you know what? I'm going to make a note of that as part of my design documents as well. That the no modalities of gameplay. And so what that means is that, as Alter Ego has just sort of said, that we won't sort of switch between, right, now we're in building mode and now we're in defending mode. Don't like that. No, don't want to do that. If energy is solar distance based, that puts a soft limit on how far things can be pushed out since fuel generation goes down. Exactly, but then you may need to go into sort of more exotic kind of fuel resources. Now, I quite like the idea of what is the wave. So what is an enemy wave? Oh, can't spell for a start. Let's scrub that out. Enemy wave. Put a little hand. Right. And I think, obviously they've got to get bigger and stronger and more difficult as time goes on. But it makes sense in the LORE, the lore of this game, that they're not just going to sort of send 3 ships after you as a scout party and then sort of 6 ships or whatever. I think they're always going to send some sort of armada, and that armada is going to get a bit more technologically advanced each time. So what I really want to see, and what will be the programming challenge for me, is I want to see epic, huge space battles. We've gone to all of this difficulty of implementing this entity component system. We know we can render thousands of things. We know we can update and simulate thousands of things. I want to see huge space battles. So huge battles. Now, I'll make it so that the enemies are significantly weaker than the player. So, we might see something like 500 enemy ships. Right? And the player may only have something like 100 ships. So these are the kind of scales I want to see. Because what I want to be able to do is see a scene where we've got ships all over the place, all with lasers going pew, 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 having a big old battle. And I think that would be quite fun to program as well. And just letting it sort of run its course. There's a reason for this, because I might sort of have a bit of delve into what's called action selection mechanisms. Now, anybody that knows me a little bit more than sort of the typical fan will know that actually action selection mechanisms is what I study quite intensively. So I think there's some merit there, and it's a sort of a soft segue into a little bit of. I'm going to write it very small, little bit of ML there. I quite like the idea of having these sort of organic frameworks to control all of those space battles. I think that's going to look awesome, particularly if we can get it to render properly. Waves could wax and wane over time. Yeah, yes, possibly. Let's capture that as an idea. I think it might be a little bit more discrete, because what I want is at the end of the wave, waves wax and wane. I quite like the idea is that once the wave is really just sort of the preparatory or preparatory, depending on where you're from, sort of battle to fight before the big boss ship arrives. And it's the big boss ship which is the bit that changes each time. So there's like a load of ships, and then after, 10 minutes of battle, after X minutes, the sort of a boss craft zips in. And the boss craft can have different characteristics of what they want to try and do. But I just like the idea of having swarms, and I'm going to write that. That's an interesting word to keep here. Swarms of stuff going on. I like that. One thing I loved from Next War was that you could plop down 500 buildings and build them based on time. When you see if you didn't have enough, they'd all be stalled. Yeah, I think I think you're quite right that I don't really want to do on this planet's surface the placing of buildings, but I do quite like the idea of building the satellites up like this. So you have to actually think about the sort of the power management side of it, and of course how many eggs you're putting into one basket. You could build the one big mega satellite, but of course that's then sort of susceptible to being broken up during the attacks. So I have to start thinking about that. And of course, a large part of this will be, it's not just defense with ships. You're also going to have defensive stuff on the space stations as well. Yeah. Turrets and that sort of thing. These will all need balancing, and it all needs playing with. Huge, exactly. The idea of involving enemies sounds really good. Well, I think there's something to be said for the amount of chaos that's going to happen here, because everything's sort of orbiting everything else, and the way I'm planning on controlling the enemy ships to try and make it visually pleasing is going to lead to a lot of chaos. I imagine the strategy side of this is just going to fall apart, and it will be one side tank rushing the other, but I'm going to have fun doing it. Sounds like some spatial acceleration structures are needed. Yeah, so that's a good point, Magetsu. Once we get to the point where we've got hundreds of things interacting with each other, we can't just rattle through a gigantic list. That's been the one downside to the entity component system. So I've actually found that the ECS has been fun to learn about, but is it actually presenting more disadvantages than ever? We just seem to be iterating through many lists. Iterating through lists. Is that ideal? No, probably not. Do we need to accelerate space? And Magetsu, personally, I know Magetsu quite well. He's into sort of spatial acceleration as an idea. So no doubt he's thinking of exotic sort of tree systems to partition that space. Salvage destroyed enemy ships for resources. Get some already processed materials. Well, I imagine after a big battle, maybe that's something that you do actually want. You're going to want some sort of like harvester ships, or they basically become sort of debris like asteroids. So do spaceships leave debris? Let's make a note of that. So what happens to a destroyed spaceship? Destroyed craft and station components. Create a debris field. I can't see a debris field being any different to the asteroid belt in terms of how we harvest the resources. It's just the asteroids they've got a lot more resource you can get from them. So I quite like that. So we'll have the same sort of harvesting facility. Now, depending on what we want, we could have ships that just go and harvest absolutely everything and anything they can go and pick up, or you have to have specialist harvesting ships for different classifications of resources. Now, given we've not really labelled any resources here, do we actually need different types of ship? I don't know is the answer. Classification of resources. For example, you could have it depends on what kind of detail. I think we want to do more than just metal, wood, water, that sort of thing. Particularly for space, you may want things which are like gases, for example, so hydrogen, helium, argon, that sort of thing. You might want metals, so you're building your spaceship out of aluminium and titanium and exotic metal X. They're the resource. I think we're going to need that kind of variety to make the game interesting. But the type of harvester that can go out and collect gases probably isn't the same ship that can go out and collect solid metals. But I don't want to create too many things because I have to find a way of drawing all of these assets. Don't give me that much credit. I'm merely just a peasant who knows that spatial extraction makes your game brewer. Good evening, Terry. So I'm pleased that we're doing this because it's actually the first time I've sat down and thought, actually, what is it that I'm trying to get here? Because the game's sort of been changing in shape and form. And now I'll repeat something I said at the start, that sort of my life is changing a little bit at the moment, but for the better. October is usually a very busy time for me with work. It just happens to be that my industry, which happens to be sort of the robot industry, tends to do all of its budgeting around October, so all of the money gets spent and all of the deadlines are starting to pop up. Fortunately for me, they've mostly passed now, and then something significant happened a couple of weeks ago, which I know most of you already know if you're on the Discord, and that is X10 slept through the night. So that's been going on for a couple of weeks, which has dramatically freed up some time for me to carry on doing some programming and getting back into the swing of things. In fact, I've been working on 4 different videos, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. The idea of having tankers, bulkers, etc. as transport ships seems intriguing. Yeah, I think there's something to that, but I have to draw all of these assets. So we have different types of ship. So different classes of ship. Now let's have a think about ship. Ships. I have to be careful about saying that, don't I? Let's have a think. So we know that we're going to have sort of, I guess we've got battles, right? Battling ships, fighters, that sort of thing. We'll split these up in a minute, and we know that we're going to have sort of transport ships. And I guess we're going to, maybe there's a third category, I don't know. So transport, we know probably we're going to have always a case of having light transport for small volumes, I guess medium. This is easy, low-hanging fruit stuff here. Medium and heavy. And potentially, I don't know, something like extreme. And I guess in many respects the same categories apply to battle type ships, but I'd like to sort of think there's a bit more to it in the battle ones. That you'd have sort of lightweight gunning ships, you'd have some heavy cannon type ships, you'd have some turret type ships. And do we have to sort of place these around the map, or are these associated with a space station, or do they go and patrol a particular region? You need to think about these things too. Station repair ships. Okay, so things like utility ships. Okay, that's a good one to put in. So things like repair, salvage potentially. Need special stuff for salvage. Maybe things like refueling if we go down the fuel route. Refuel. Maybe things like. Yeah, I don't know. It depends how we fuel the ship. I don't want it to go too complicated. Construction ships. Yeah, okay, that's a good one. That probably is a Construction. That's an O. Construction. Sorry, Danny Cron. Right. I mean, I assume all the entities orbit a planet or other entity except the sun. Yeah, pretty much everything's orbiting everything else. Alien Overlord vessel. Oh, that's a good point. One specific class of ship here that we've not included is enemy. We're only ever going to see enemy ships. Enemy or non-player species ship. We did talk about the idea we could have traders before. Now, I think as a proof of concept, we probably don't want to have so many different tiers. Why have I lost my mouse cursor? Where's it gone? There we go. I don't know why you have to go through that song and dance sometimes in OneNote. Yeah, because you start going down this route, somebody's got to draw graphics to have all of this happen, and then you start asking questions, well, can a super heavy transporter land on a space station with just a single docking port, or does it need a larger one? I think what I'll do is just go down the route of a docking port holds a ship, irrespective of size. I just want to keep things somewhat simple enough that we can actually finish something. Tankers can probably refuel. All you need is a hose. A big space hose. Goes on for millions of miles. So we know we've got different types of ships. We know we're also going to have to come up with a list of resources. Now maybe that's something to start chatting about on the Discord. Putting a resource document together. And from that, I guess we start forming a bit of a technology tree, and that tells us what type of modules we need from the space station. So is that actually sort of a plan of how to move forward here? So we need to, one, list in-game resources. From this, we can form a production tree. From that, we can establish what space station components we need. Establish space station processes, I guess. And from that, we can then establish some sort of technology tree. And it's the technology tree that then, I guess, there's kind of a bit of feedback with that one. Could you give a quick explanation about spaceships, what they're for, etc.? Okay, very, very quickly, because we've not got much time left. If you've got a huge world, that's a good square, isn't it? If you've got a huge world, and in your world you've got a spaceship, and you've got, say, another spaceship. Let's say we wanted to pilot one of these spaceships towards the other. They have some sort of interaction. Well, when you've got this sort of two ships going on, that's a very simple interaction. You can have a list of your ships. It's got the two ships in it, and you just simply iterate through the list and update all of their positions and see how they interact with each other. So we know that these two are looking to try and find each other in this space, so they can just check their position, do Pythagoras, and work out where they are. That's great until you start having several more ships. Because effectively what you have here is if every ship has to sort of check what's going on with all of the other ships within a certain radius, you've got like an interesting searching problem. Firstly, you've got, was it O to the n squared over 2? Is it n squared over 2 complexity of problem to try and solve? But you've also then got to somehow create a list of ships which is within the given radius of another ship. This is slow and often unnecessary, because what we can do is take that space, and let's say very crudely here, so the very crude spatial acceleration structure would be a quad tree, as you can partition the space in such a way. For example, here we know that this ship here can primarily sort of to begin with, sort of see the ships in this quad up here. So that's how you would start doing that kind of search. It gets a bit more complicated when you're sort of doing radial searches around a particular point. But why bother searching sort of all of this empty space when you know that if you partition this space up in the same way, maybe then we've got just this set of ships to worry about. And then we can partition that space up in the same way. And so you can decide, where do we start ignoring things that aren't very interesting. It's a way of representing sort of a complicated space, but on the whole has a rather sparse population of elements inside. Isn't that kind of partitioning though, assuming they're stored in a tree with the sun being the root? They're not stored in a tree. Well, the planets are, but all of the things around them are not going to be, because the spacecraft can actually travel through space. And you probably want different damage types too, maybe some kind of rock, paper, scissors system. My battles are going to be basically lasers blasting lasers. And because I want incredibly epic battles, hundreds and hundreds of ships, we may have to think about actually how simple is the combat for that to be realistic. As soon as we start having lots of different classes of weapon, that becomes quite tricky, because you have no means of personally deploying these. The ships are fully AI controlled. They're just going to go and do their thing. But I did think that it would be useful scrolling the wrong window here. It would be useful to be able to specify sort of, let's take our solar system again, that if you start creating ships, you might, particularly battleships or warships, you might want to start sort of specifying a battalion of them and a particular formation in different parts of space. Relative to everything else that's going on. So these then can act as your defensive barriers. So your intelligence is telling you that somehow the wave this time is going to be coming roughly from this direction. You can then pick up your battalion of ships and position them to where you think is going to be a useful location to start solving that problem. Whether the formations actually do anything or not, I don't know, but it's interesting. Don't forget, the whole point of this series is to create interesting stuff to make videos about, and I'm quite interested in things maintaining formation as they're flying around space. I think that's an interesting problem to solve. Maybe kind of rock, paper, scissors, frigate, cruiser, carrier, whatever. Give enough variation while being simple with hundreds of different ones. Don't know. Rock, paper, scissors system, but differing damage or armor and mitigation types are pretty standard in tower defense games. I could reasonably see a couple of different weapons types, some good against fighters, some good against capital ships, some good against shields. Yeah, okay. I mean, these are things to start playing about with. But after today, and I know it's not been a coding one, although I will show some code just very briefly. I just wanted to sort of show the progress on the GUI PegX. I now actually have the text controls as part of the PegX, and you can copy and you can paste between the two. So these are the multi-text controls, and this is a single text control along the bottom. And the combo box is now fixed too, so it pops up a drop-down list and behaves like a combo box. I've not yet connected any events to these things, but this is going to be sort of one big demo application which we can start to play with. The text boxes also have some additional tricks up their sleeves if you wanted to use them as code editors, but I'm not going to show that just yet. So a little bit of code, a little bit of progress on something that I wanted to show. Looks cool, but burns eyes. Solly is streaming, by the way. Yes, okay. How do we actually raid somebody? How does that work? Because Solly's is worth looking. If I click on raid channel here, I don't know how to do this. I've never done this before. Let's try. Solly Gaming. There we go. Let's go and say hi to Solly. And I think what we want to do is, there we go. So I don't know how this works. I don't know whose chat we're in now or anything.